Welcome to the Life You're Made For with me, Dr. Heather Penny. We're going to be having conversations that talk about us spiraling up versus spiraling down, because we all want to be living lives that are about thriving, not just surviving. This is the life you're made for. So let's get going. Hello, everyone. We are so excited to have Jen Morton here today, who is the not the president, the CEO of AGM, which is Association of Golf Merchandising. Did I get that right, Jen?
Association of Golf Merchandisers.
All right. So excited to have her here, just talk about leadership and all the things that she holds and really what it looks like to be the whole leader. So before we jump in, Jen, is there anything else you want to say about who you are and what you do?
No, I just want to thank you for having me here. I think the messaging and what it is that you are bringing to everyone around you is so impactful and important. So I'm just grateful to be here for you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Jen and I got to meet. Well, let's start where we first got to meet.
Sounds good.
On the bleachers with two little boys playing baseball, huh?
That's right. Baseball moms unite.
Yep. That was our other life. And then we started moving back in our profession. Both our boys are, mine's in college. I think yours is a senior year, right?
Senior year, yeah.
Yeah. So we're starting to move into that empty nest and starting to pick up our careers a little bit more. So that's where we got to meet. And then more recently, I got to join Jen Morton at the AGM for a keynote presentation. And I had so much fun. And we talked about the whole leader. So Jen, what were some takeaways for you during that time?
I'm just so grateful. The feedback from our audience at the 2023 AGM Retail Conference that we held recently in Orlando, Florida, was basically how much my audience came back to me and was like, it was like Heather was speaking directly to me. And I think when you are standing in front of a room of close to 300 people, and you're able to reach souls and reach individuals, I think that really speaks volume for the message that you are trying to instill in others and the importance of that. I know for me personally, having that opportunity to re-examine and reevaluate how one's individual strengths and passions really do help one to become a more effective leader.
It's amazing what we do to ourselves that drains us. And I think one of the hardest truths, and I always try and say this with so much compassion, I always tell people, don't worry, all my fingers are pointing back. But we kind of cause the problem. We push ourselves. We don't take care of ourselves holistically. And then we wonder why we're fried and drained or depressed or anxious or just burned out. And I think one of the hardest things is really looking at ourselves in the mirror and learning how to lovingly, and I'm trying to say that carefully, just lovingly take responsibility for our levels of fulfillment and how we get to step into life as a leadership.
And, I think you're so right. I think it becomes, I don't want to say it's easy. It's never easy, but there are times where you recognize that you do have that balance. And then, a really good example would be leading up to this conference, where you're not going to love to hear this whatsoever, but where I was working 15, 16-hour days, and you just strive and strive and strive to do what you think is right for one aspect. And then all of these other aspects of who you are and what you want to be really do fall to the wayside. It's impossible not only is it impossible, but it's an unrealistic expectation to be all for everyone. And until you take that time and energy to invest in yourself, you really can't be everything to everyone else.
So well said. And I think the danger of that is it works for a season, right? You need to do that to get the conference off the ground. And I kind of need to do that too. I had to clear my client schedule. I had to jump on a plane and I had to make sure I got out to Orlando, and there's a season of survival. One of the temptations that happens to us is because we're successful in that, we get stuck in that. We think that's the way we got to keep operating. Can you speak a little bit to that?
No, you're right. And I find personally that is very true for me in whatever avenue it is that I'm pursuing, whether that is that business side of things or more of a personal, endeavor. For example, I lost 100 pounds at one point in time, and, that ends up becoming a little consuming. And having that frame of reference to be able to, and I think it's okay to give yourself um, peace to be like, it's okay to be in that realm for certain periods of time. Sometimes it's what you kind of need to do to get stuff done, as long as you also recognize that you're in that spot and know that you need to get out of it.
Right. Right. And I don't know if anyone else can relate with this out there, but if you're anyone like me, where I really do enjoy achieving and succeeding, there's a weird little high or addiction we get off of that we keep pushing ourselves. And it almost like you want to stay in motion versus pulling back and actually doing some self-reflective work and assessing how we're doing mind, body, heart, spirit. That requires a different mindset, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it absolutely does. And having the, so like for me, I forget how you talk about it in your book, but these periods of time of being able to just step back and take that time for yourself. And, for me, there's probably 3 ways I do that. I like to walk. I like not just bubble baths, just any bath and journaling. And, and even when things were getting really desperately like, okay, I need to spend every waking moment doing something, I always fell back to needing to have at least one of those pieces to keep me whole. And really it very much helped center me at all time.
I love that you use that word whole. I think as I'm aging, I think that's becoming my main goal, to stay whole. And I define it more in these dualistic parts of the mind. I want to be whole in my mind. I want to be whole in my body. I want to be whole in my spirit. I want to be whole in my heart, my emotions. What does that mean for you to be whole?
So absolutely 100% the same definition you just gave. And for me, if we went into a very personal journey, it took me a really long time to even recognize that I didn't have that, but didn't recognize I didn't have that. And the mind, I consider myself intelligent, not always wise, but intelligent. and and so I really put a lot of value on the mind. And your book talked a lot about how there can be some problems with that, in that the mind also tends to be the voice of negativity. And so having that voice constantly telling you you're not good enough, or you need to be better, or you're X, Y, or Z, and you just need to keep pushing and pushing. There's a couple of things, there's that piece, and then your story about the swings, the being on that swing, was
Tire
so
swing.
so valuable to me, because the other piece of that for me personally is I had completely lost the voice of my heart slash spirit. I probably spent COVID. This sounds weird, but COVID was really good for me personally, in that it really very much allowed me that opportunity to take a step back and work on my quote unquote whole self, and really recognize that emotional, which I consider the heart, that emotional self didn't have a voice. And I had no idea how to listen to that voice. And so learning who quote unquote she was, and that she had value and deserved to be listened to, has been a very powerful journey for me these last few years.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I think it's a journey every person has to take. And For those of you listening, Jennifer's referencing the allegory I use quite a bit of the little girl who gets one bracelet given to her, and then over the years she gets more and more bracelets given to her, which prevent her to go on her beloved tire swing and then spending time under the stars. And the tire swing really represents an active rest that allows you to kind of find your voice again, and the stars represents a contemplative rest, the journaling, the listening to yourself. And then there's also this idea of this voice on the wind. There's some presence out there that's calling you back to your sense of self. And, it can be as concrete as this awesome teacher or coach that was in your life, or it can be as abstract as a divine figure or a God being up there. All of it counts. Whatever's calling you back to your sense of self is what I'm trying to say. I believe at some point in our life, we kind of have this awakening that says, I don't think I am being who I want to be, doing what I want to do. In fact, I'm pretty much on the wrong path. And then as you look down, you realize I got 20 bracelets on each arm. How did these pile up? And why are they preventing me from doing what I actually love? So I'm curious, do you have one of those moments that you just kind of realize this isn't me and I get to return to me?
So I'm going to tell a story, and it's kind of a weird story. I'm going to say that up front. It's a very weird story. So part of this journey, part of this path was really opening myself up to, and I find that the more you are willing to open yourself up, the more people come into your life that you didn't really recognize that you necessarily needed. But as soon as you do allow yourself, I kind of consider it like you open yourself to the energy of the universe, and the energy of the universe provides what you need. And I started working with this mentor who was and continues to be a very influential business person in the corporate world. And after a while, this is where it gets kind of weird, I started having a dream that I used to have. It was a nightmare that I used to have every night as a child. And I couldn't figure out why after 40 years, I started having this nightmare again. And in the nightmare, I was back to being this little girl. And basically there's a dragon in it that comes and it eats me. And in that dream, I'm like waiting for this mentor to come and save me. And so and this is a very like well-to-do professional individual. But I'm like, I'm just going to take a chance and tell them that I'm having this recurring dream. You need to come and like save the child within me. And it was a bit of an embarrassing conversation for me, to be honest, because it's weird. And vulnerable. It is very vulnerable and just weird. I couldn't figure out why after 40 years I was back to having this recurring nightmare, although I was seeing it from who I am now. And it wasn't scaring me. I just recognized that I was waiting for something that just wasn't happening night after night after night. And he was very polite and listened to me and came back and said, you know what, Jen, the reality is you are not there waiting for me to come and slay that dragon. He goes, you are now capable of slaying your own dragon. He goes, you're waiting for me to show you that you have the tools, and you've always had the tools available for you. And then he said something that he's like, call me tonight before you go to bed. And I'm thinking, okay, this is escalating the weird. And it was just a weird thing. And then that night he said to me, when you go to sleep tonight, I want you to look down in your hands, and in one hand, you're going to find a sword. And in the other hand, you're going to see a shield. And really, that's not me giving you the tools. That's you seeing that you already have the tools.
Wow. I'm sorry. I just got chills. I love that.
Sure, and like, who would have, one, I'm like, who would have thought that? And two, thank you for having the wherewithal to just listen to whatever it was that I was trying to express.
Yeah.
And literally that night, I fought that dragon and slayed that dragon in this way that is so like made for television. And yet
Oh.
it was so important and impactful for me.
Mm.
And that, I think, and getting back roundabout to your original thing, that was very much the inner spirit of me needing to stand up and fight for her place in this world.
Mm.
And and so yeah, that's a very weird, it's a very weird story, but it is absolutely truth. And it makes me just very, very grateful to that
Mhm.
individual for
Mhm.
having this out of the box thinking of how to deal
Mhm.
with that.
Yeah, and I think it's a courageous story, Jen, because I believe many of us live with reoccurring dreams, whether it's literally or whether it's just abstract, but we live with this reoccurring sense of I'm made for more or this isn't me. And it sounds like the true self in him saw the true self in you. And talk about true mentorship, right?
Truly,
Yeah.
truly, and
Mhm.
to me, it's interesting because I really want to say that slaying that dragon really showed me
Mhm.
that there's nothing really to be afraid of. I don't need to
Mhm.
wait for others to come and save me or help me or do things.
Mhm.
I have all those tools and all that power within myself.
Mhm.
And it's like this nightmare that I had when I was, between the ages of 4 and 7,
Mhm.
to have and for it to have gone away for over 40 years, to then come back and take care of that now, how much that
Mhm.
just released
Mhm.
within me
Mhm.
was, I mean, for like, it was weird,
Mhm.
in a very beautiful, beautiful sense for me.
Oh, yeah. It makes me think of a reoccurring dream I had for years about my mouth melting together and I couldn't talk. And I'd wake up in this panic. I mean, it's so obvious what I was dealing with. And when I finally started realizing I need to go find my voice, I need to go use it, that began, almost 15 years ago, moving me out of climbing the corporate ladder, climbing the academic ladder, and moving more into opening my own coaching company with not a client in sight and going after my own doctorate and everything like that, saying, I have no idea how this is going to end, but something is telling me this nightmare is telling me, my inner presence, my inner self is saying, save me, help me, save me. And I love that, not just empowerment message that I'm hearing you talk about. What I really love is this personal responsibility. Our tendency is, well, that was a weird dream. I'm just going to go watch a movie or read a book or go eat something. All of our favorite things we love to do to distract ourselves. But to have the wherewithal and really truly not just the clarity, the confidence, but ultimately the courage, because courage is about taking action to do something about something that's happening to you internally. That's where I believe life transformation happens. And how
100%.
we listen to our inner self saying, help me go find that life, go after that life. And I work with a spiritual director. I absolutely love her. And before I went to go speak, she said, Heather, bring them home. I never forgot that phrase. I go, bring them home. My gosh, I love that. Bring them home to their sense of self. I'm not bringing them home to me. I'm not bringing them home to selling more merchandise. I'm bringing them home to their sense of self, which will make them successful in all these other areas. But I want to do everything I can to help bring people home to who they really are so that they feel at home with their sense of self. And in a world where we live very divided, we literally live divided from ourselves, mind, body, heart, and spirit. And you heard me speak to that at the conference because I wanted to get concrete. What does that mean for the whole sense of self? So as we're talking about this, I mean, there are some areas that you you enter into more easily, the mind or the body or the heart or the spirit. For you, where do you feel like you either enter in more easily, or maybe it's easier to answer, where do you feel like you maybe ignore more easily?
So without a doubt, it's the mind is the one that I trust. I just
Mm.
trust that more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional and spirit, which I find which are different to me, they're
Mm-hmm.
different voices. The emotional to me is more childlike and more open to joy and happiness,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the spirit, I think, is the closest sense of true self.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's learning to um, listen
Mm-hmm.
to those pieces of self, and
Mm-hmm.
learning that that childlike wonder
Mm-hmm.
is as important as the mind, and I always had so much confidence in that mental piece. And
Mm-hmm.
growing up, for me, there was a lot of don't cry, don't show your emotion,
Mm-hmm.
don't do these things. And so those pieces were really trapped, I think, for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. I mean, to the point realistically that as before 3 years ago, I had pretty much stopped crying. And
Mm-hmm.
so, to have these reactions and be like, okay, my eyeballs are leaking, and that's a good thing, and it's fabulous, because by taking that time to
Mm-hmm.
invest in my own self-awareness, my own
Mm-hmm.
personal growth,
Mm-hmm.
that's when one can become better suited to leading others. I mean, that allows you to be a more active listener. That allows you to build those strong foundations, because you just can see, hear, feel, and relate to
Mm-hmm.
all of these pieces
Mm-hmm.
of those around you.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought it back to that, because to serve our people as leaders requires a whole presence. And I know I've done it well, and I know I've done it not so well. And when I've done it not so well, it's usually me, again, having to look in the mirror and realizing I cut off pieces of myself. I cut off, or I ignored or suppressed the heart piece, or I suppressed the mind piece, and there's shadow sides to all of this. We can stay way over in the mind or way over in the heart. It's that beautiful kind of dance we need to do with our internal sense of self to say, I've got to be responsible for bringing my sense of self to the table as a leader. And in doing that, I really need to make sure I'm assessing all four of these parts, because when I do that, I can help my people
Right.
with whatever that is that they're experiencing. And honestly, in the work that I do as a coach, I never know what I'm going to get when I get on the line. And I had 8 calls today, and I thought, I think every one of them surprised me. I had only 4 yesterday, but I was so exhausted because of the emotional intensity that was happening. And I thought, I am so glad I brought my whole self to this conversation and didn't bring my own agenda. I think one of the things I'm trying to be conscious of is what pulls us away from our sense of self. Do you have any clarity on that?
In some ways, I want to say life, and I don't mean life as in, well, maybe I do. Life,
Mm,
and I think it's so easy to get wrapped up not just in the day-to-day pressures that are pulling on you, but
mm-hmm,
the expectations. And the piece of what you said that really resounded with me is, you came out of all 8 calls today really surprised.
mm-hmm,
And the only reason you did that is because you didn't go into them with
mm-hmm,
a preconceived notion of what you want to take out of them. If
mm-hmm,
you had, you would have come out with, yes, this followed the pathway that I had expected it to, because
mm-hmm,
you wouldn't have been open
mm-hmm,
to the direction that the conversations went into.
mm-hmm,
Um, and that sense of openness and wonder and ability just to have a path, because I do believe it's important to have a vision, to have goals, and
Mm-hmm.
to have a direction where you see things,
Mm-hmm.
but still to be open to how you're going to get there.
Mm.
And man, that's what gives joy and wonder to our world and what's around us.
I love that you brought that up. Openness and wonder, because you're right. I think it's the most respectful gift we can give people that we are leading. And I think one of the most damaging things that we can do, and again, all my fingers pointing back because I've done it before too, is when I go in with too strong of agenda and it shuts down the wonder. When I go in too much of my sense of rightness and maybe arrogance, it shuts down the receptivity or being able to read the room. And I think all of us have experienced times when we have not done it well. And again, I just keep encouraging leaders, there's no shame in this. We've all done this poorly, but being able to understand why we did it, which was, oh, okay, I came in with my own agenda, or I came in with the answers and they were the wrong answers to the wrong questions. I never even listened to what their questions were, and as I'm aging, I'm finding this stay open, stay receptive. And I talk about it in my book, The Staying Powers. And the first one is really staying curious to what is this time going to bring me, whether it's a 1 hour conversation or whether it's leading a team meeting or whether it's moving your team forward in a project. We're staying curious about what is really going on and how am I bringing my whole sense of self to this? And how is it alerting me to other people's sense of self and how they are bringing that or disregarding that? I care mostly about that. And ultimately, since I am an achiever, it really does yield high deliverables, high results, high success. So I'm not saying we're having a kumbaya session all the time or counseling, but I'm just saying, I think understanding how we care for a whole sense of self can allow you to change in a nanosecond and realize, oops, this is not the agenda. This is not what we need to talk about today. I need to just listen and ask questions. And as I listen to them talk, not only does it give me clarity on who they are and what they need, it also provides a collective clarity to move the project forward. Can you speak a little bit to that?
You're absolutely right. And I'm a very visual person. Like all my stuff, it's very visual. I like building foundations. I like adding bricks. All of these are important to me. And as you're talking about that, the more I'm in leadership, people talk a lot about steering the ship, and there's the ship, and they're the captain. I think more, or who I want to be, is not the pilot steering the ship. I want to be that rudder that kind of helps guide the direction, but letting the team help be in charge of determining how we get there. And for me, that in itself is a really big change, because to me, it no longer becomes the one person. It's no longer the captain steering the ship. It's the entire team that's equally important in determining how we get there, and recognizing that you need all kinds of people on that ship to truly create greatness and to create success. And if you had a bunch of type A personalities all trying to steer that ship, yeah, that's going to go one direction. But if you have the givers and the people who, are the doers as well as the dreamers, and if you let everybody have their voice and share their voice, you're going to get further, and it's going to be a happier, better journey by the time you arrive at your destination. And maybe that destination is not where you thought you were initially headed for, and that's okay too.
I love that. I love that for those of us who do want to get from A to Z, we can get there, because there is that responsibility that we all hold as leaders to guide our team. But I love that analogy of the rudder versus the steering wheel, because it goes back to what your wonderful mentor taught you about. You got your own sword and your own shield in your own hand. You got this. And I have not abandoned you. Literally, I've not jumped ship. I'm going to be the rudder here, and you're going to feel my presence. And it makes me think of a conversation I had earlier today when he said, well, I'm not sure what to bring to the table today. And I said, that's okay. That's okay. Let me ask a couple questions. And as I asked the questions, he began to just open up, and boy, it took a turn that I was not expecting.
Mm-hmm.
What he was really saying was, am I allowed to talk about something I really want to talk about? And are you going to be okay with this? And what's happening there is he's finding his sense of self. He's finding his voice. And in doing that, it's making him a better leader. So it's worth the time,
Totally.
Yeah.
One of the things I've just absolutely stolen from you is your space of grace. And, what you're talking about there, to be just kind of triggered that within me as well. And having that space where, in this case, it was just the freedom to share what they needed to share. But, that can pull out in so many different ways. And, there's a lot of talk these days about workplaces wanting to have a family feel, and some employees being like, no, I have my family. This is work. Having spent most of my career literally in a family business where it was sometimes difficult to separate the two. I do very much like that family oriented space. I see that as a space of grace where, you need to be able to have these places where you can openly discuss whatever it is that needs to be discussed, even if that is, I am not in a space today to be able to give 100% or 50% because of stuff that's going on, behind the scenes. And to have a team and to have people there ready to pick you up and to support you, because it's more than a job. I mean, it's this whole body, this whole being that we are trying to make better. I mean, that's the reality. You want your staff, you want the people who work with you, to know that they can trust you with all of who they are. And I think that very much comes from that that space of grace. And I don't know.
I love it. And thank you for plugging that, because it's my new book coming out. So I appreciate
is
it. So thank you. And listeners, you heard it here, but it was just a concept. And what you're talking about, there's 7 attributes to grace space. And the one you're talking about is the one I call freedom versus control. So it's really along these lines that we can all bring a space of grace, or we can bring our grace space with us. And it requires a choice, an intentional choice. So the whole, there's 7 attributes, and it shows the juxtapose. You can be a person of freedom, or you can be a person of control. And I'm not saying one is all bad or all good. We need some of both, but we want to live the majority of that time in that sense of freedom that says we're going to give one another the freedom to bring their best self, to find their best self, to shape this with us, to steer the ship while we're the rudder. We are holding that space. Like I said, we're not abandoning them. We're not jumping ship. We're holding that space, but we're holding it so gracefully. And one of the attributes is being able to say, I'm not going to control the ship. I'm not going to control how everything's going to go down. I am going to be a critical part of this as the leader, and I'm choosing the rudder, and I'm going to steer this. But everyone else has a really critical role to play in this. And what you're talking about, and that's one of my favorite attributes, is the freedom versus control. And it goes back to your early point. This really takes so much pressure off us as leaders. Wouldn't you rather be living, offering freedom to your people and mentoring them and developing them versus, and I've seen this really backfire poorly on leaders, when they're living in this, they're choosing control versus freedom, it doesn't end well, because nobody wants to be controlled. Nobody wants to be controlled. we all want to be offered the permission to feel empowered and to find our sense of self and to be a valuable, positive contributor on the team. And we want to be steered and mentored and guided. We don't want to be left to our own devices. But I think there's such a powerful framework for this gray space of what we're offering people and saying, we get to be leaders that offer freedom because we believe that people do hold wisdom and value within themselves. And it's not our job to control people or even agendas or processes. It's our job to serve people and also to steer some of the guidance and the direction of it and even the vision. But ultimately, as leaders, we want to make sure that we are allowing and empowering people to bring them home, bring them home to their sense of self.
Absolutely. And giving them that freedom and absolutely.
Well, Jen, we're going to start wrapping up here. We're over the hump of middle age right here. We're probably right around middle age. I'm not sure how you all are, so I'll speak for myself. I'm 52 and I'm over the hump here of middle age and kind of approaching it. So I guess the question I want to ask is, what advice do you have for young leaders that are rising up through the ranks? What advice would you give them?
I think, gosh, that's such a good question. I think what I would say is it's okay not to have all the answers. You know, I think that a young leader so frequently feels like they have to have all the answers, and just having the wisdom to trust in yourself and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because in my opinion, there really aren't mistakes. It's just learning opportunities. And you are going to learn so much from, as long as you're willing to look at it honestly and openly and see things for what they are. The opportunities in front of you you don't always have to play it safe. And just to not try to either be more than what you currently are, be open to lessons and values and pieces that you can pick up, maybe not only from mentors and people above you, but people either at your level or people that you are working with. You just have to be open to all of that and never be afraid to ask for help or to ask for, that hand to help pull you up.
I love that. I love that. That's a good one. Okay, here's the last question I love to end with. What's your morning ritual?
So, we talked early. I will go through my email just a little bit before I get out of bed. I have to do that. But at that point, I literally set it aside and I will take a bath. I will take that restorative moment for myself just to help me put everything aside and focus in on what I feel is important for me in that day. I'm not a coffee drinker, so, I don't start with caffeine. If I can then get dressed and spend a few moments just to take a very short walk, because I'm also like, okay, time to get to work. But even if it's a short walk around the block, just to organize myself and get my because I want to be proactive. I don't want to be reactive. And so I recognize most people are like, don't look in bed at your email. But for me, it just gives me an opportunity to just take a quick overview, and then I'll go through and do a couple of things that are important for me and to center me before I then utilize that to envision the rest of my day.
Oh, I get that. Sometimes I have to do that as well, because I'm like, I just need to know if there's any fires I need to put out.
Exactly.
I can do a quick review, and then I'm like, okay, I'll put a boundary on it 2 minutes, and then I'm done. And I've got, I think, 3 or 4 emails now that I check, but so I try and step away from that. And you're right, it's how we start our days. What I'm finding too is it's a moving target. For me now, it's one of my true beliefs I'm living with is movement is a privilege. And so for now, I'm really enjoying getting up and moving. And this is a little bit more 2 weeks new. Before that, it was getting up and just relaxing on my couch and reading. But I'm feeling this shift, like I want to move, and I'm paying attention to that. But I've found that that's interesting, that sometimes our morning rituals, at least for me, they're kind of a moving target depending on which season you are in life.
I agree.
Well, Jen, any last words before we sign off?
No, I just would like to say thank you again. And if I had to put out any advice, I would just say, everyone's available. Everyone can slay their own dragons. You just need to trust in yourself and not be afraid to find your mentors, find the people who are there to lend a hand, to help pick you up, and to help guide you the way you need to be when you need the guidance.
So. Oh, I love that. That's a great place to end. Thanks for joining us today and just being here with us, Jen, and all our listeners. Just a great conversation. And I'm thinking, Jen, we need to take our own walk.
I'm all for it anytime.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We had such a great time today. And obviously, we are all stepping into this life that we're made for. But isn't it nice to have a little bit of support along the way? If you want to find out more about the life that you're made for, come find me at heatherpenny.com. Go ahead and subscribe. Give us a review. That really helps us out and helps spread the word. You get to step into the life that you're made for. Cheering you on.